Thank you, Bill, and thank you all for being here. Can you all hear me? Yeah. Great, wonderful. I have to tell you, when I first got out of law school, I actually went to the ACLU of Massachusetts, and I said, what I really want is to be an attorney like Bill at the ACLU of Massachusetts. And they said, you know what? When somebody gets a job as an attorney at the ACLU, they never, ever leave because it's a really fun and important job. So you better go on your way because there's never going to be an opening. So I did, and I came back about, 5, 6 years later, having done some cases, and I thought, God, now I'm executive director, I can fire you and give me the job I really wanted. So I'll be moving to Northampton shortly. No, I'm kidding. Although I'd love to.
This is going well.
Anyway, it's really wonderful to be here, and it's especially an honor to be here to meet Mary Commager and to be here to give a speech in the name of Henry Steele Commager, since he was such an ardent defender of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, which of course is the very mission of the American Civil Liberties Union, both here in Massachusetts and across the nation. And it's really wonderful to be here in Greenfield, in part because that was my first civil liberties case that I did as a lawyer, came out of here, and also because I'm so excited to know that we're going to have, I'm guessing, 100, 150 new members, all of you, here in Springfield. So I do hope that you will join our efforts. The title of my talk today is How Big Brother is Getting Even Bigger in the Internet Age. And of course, Professor Commager was a contemporary, born just 1 year apart of George Orwell, whose book, 1984, of course, coined the term Big Brother to describe a dictatorship in which there was a total surveillance society, in which every person was under complete surveillance by a ruling elite and reminded Big Brother is watching you, whether he really was or not. And both Orwell and Commager warned us of the danger to our democracy that's posed when we have a world of faceless bureaucrats, big brothers and sisters, who can monitor our every move, our every keystroke, where we go, what we read, what we watch, and what we do. And today, that total surveillance society is very nearly upon us. It's no longer science fiction. We live in a world where not only Big Brother, but lots of little brothers and sisters in local law enforcement and local bureaucracies can now monitor our every move, and we don't even know about it. And unless we act as citizens of this Commonwealth and of this country, we are going to be outstripped by technology because law has a hard time keeping pace and citizens have a hard time keeping pace. So I hope today that together we can unpack the secret surveillance society that's being built around us and talk about steps that we can take to preserve our privacy and, frankly, our democracy. So let's talk first about the scope of the problem of both surveillance and secrecy. In recent years, and really since 9/11, our government has really dramatically expanded its power to operate both in secret and to spy on the ordinary American. The link between surveillance and secrecy is critical to understand. In effect, the government is increasing its power to watch us while diminishing our power to watch the government. It's the very antithesis of what democracy is supposed to be. So let's talk first for a minute about secrecy. I don't know if any of you saw the recent Washington Post series. It was an expose. If not, you should go to it. It's called Top Secret America. Came out about a month ago. Dana Priest and William Arkin were the investigative reporters on it, and they tried to unearth this top secret bureaucracy that's being erected with our tax dollars. Here's a few things from their report. First, they say, the top secret world of the government created in response to the terrorist attacks of September 11th has become so large, unwieldy, and secretive that no one actually knows how much money it costs, how many people it employs, how many programs exist within it, or how many agencies are doing the same work. But they did find out that there are some 1,271 government organizations, nearly 2,000 private companies that are working on projects related to counterterrorism or homeland security and intelligence in 10,000 different locations across the country, all in secret. An estimated 854,000 people, nearly 1.5 times as many people as live in Washington, D.C., now hold top secret security clearances. How secret is it if that many people have access to the data? In Washington and the surrounding area, there are 33 building complexes for top secret intelligence work under construction or have been built in recent years. And together they occupy the equivalent of 3 Pentagons or 22 US Capitol buildings, a total of about 17 million square feet of space, all for secret government operations. Last year, the government spent $80 billion on civilian and military intelligence activities, which is a 7% increase, lest we think that the problems have been solved with the arrival of the Obama administration. And an additional $42 billion was spent on Department of Homeland Security. A lot of that money is flowing down to the states. We're getting a decentralization of the Homeland Security apparatus, where Homeland Security money is going into local law enforcement, but the oversight is left to us, because they know that very few localities and states, A, are aware of this, and B, have the oversight apparatus to do something about it. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Secrecy is really half the battle. The other half is, of course, the surveillance industrial society and the increasing turning to the enemy within, the spying, the domestic spying activities of the government. I'm going to talk mostly about government today. There also is, ACLU is working, mostly the Northern California affiliate is spearheading this effort. Massachusetts is spearheading the government surveillance on corporate spying, on Facebook, Google, keystrokes and stuff like that. And I'll talk a little bit about that at the end, but there's a whole nother realm of corporate surveillance. And the biggest problem from our perspective is that corporations now are turning the data over to the government without warrants. And so we're trying to pass legislation to stop the corporations from basically feeding into the government apparatus. But I'm going to talk about the government apparatus today. Shortly after 9/11, the Department of Defense Advanced Research Project, or DARPA, launched a project under John Poindexter called Total Information Awareness. The idea was to collect and to mine vast amounts of information about the American public, including telephone records, bank records, medical records, educational records, travel records, all in an attempt to predict who might become a terrorist. Now, Congress defunded Total Information Awareness in 2003 because there was this outcry about the Orwellian state, the big brother state was coming. And instead of just abandoning it, what happened was, led by Governor Mitt Romney, through the Governors Association, there was an effort to secretly decentralize this down to the state level. And so a year later, in 2004, Mitt Romney signed an executive order launching in Massachusetts the Commonwealth Fusion Center. This is a multi-agency Uber data collection hub under the supervision of the Massachusetts State Police. There's a similar fusion center now that's been a couple years later started in Boston under the Boston Police Department called the BRIC, or the Boston Regional Intelligence Center. There are now 72 surveillance centers or fusion centers nationwide, including the 2 here in Massachusetts. They operate with no oversight, with overlapping lines of authority between federal and state agencies, and without adequate privacy protections. They also operate through what are called the Joint Terrorism Task Forces, JTTFs, and in a JTTF, local police officers are designated as special agents of the FBI, and therefore they are paid by local communities to be local community police officers, but they're actually doing the surveillance work of the FBI and reporting to the FBI, not to their local commanders, through the Joint Terrorism Task Forces and through these so-called fusion centers. 3 years ago, Boston was chosen by the federal government as a pilot city, along with Los Angeles and Miami, to launch a new aspect of fusion centers called Suspicious Activity Reporting Initiative, or SAR. The SAR program encourages state and local police officers and local neighborhood informants to collect and report on non-criminal but suspicious behavior, including things protected by the First Amendment, like taking many photographs, writing notes, espousing extreme beliefs, maybe joining the ACLU. Oh, sign up first, and then I'll just kidding. These reports and information on dozens of databases, including things like in mass gangs, they collect things like what clothes you wear, what colors you wear, how many tattoos you have, things like that. And they're fed into the fusion centers, and they're made available without, again, any oversight or independent oversight or standards, and they're made available then back to local law enforcement, state law enforcement, and to the feds. Within the next 3 years, they're hoping to expand the SAR program to every jurisdiction in Massachusetts and across the nation. So they employ, these fusion centers employ analysts to go and try to sift through lots and lots of data. They include people from the military, drug enforcement, FBI, local law enforcement. It's a range of people all trying to work together. And again, they're trying to share data, and that sounds like a good thing, right? Except for that there's no oversight. So one thing that might get into the database is if you call 911 and you have an incident report, it's called the SWIS, or the incident report, that goes in. And when we went out to see the fusion center, and I said, well, give us an example. They said, well, you call about the neighbor's barking dog. So you'll be in there, your neighbor's in there, and I didn't ask, but presumably the dog gets in the database as well. They also invite non-law enforcement participation, like private sector companies, community-based informants, and the US military to feed data in. And there's nothing to stop them from feeding garbage in, right? Because you don't have access to the database, I don't have access to the database, and there's no oversight whatsoever. This dramatic expansion of surveillance obviously raises profound privacy and civil liberties concerns, especially in the areas of freedom of speech and association. Already, the ACLU has documented dozens of cases around the country where the government has been engaged in improper domestic spying on people for protected political activities such as anti-war causes, environmental activism, and religious worship. And there's a sheet down there that we've collected that you can see from around the country. And one of the problems is because all of this is in secret, we only find out about it if somebody leaks it, or if we get a Freedom of Information Act request that gives us some data, or something like that. So it's a little haphazard. We don't know if it's comprehensive or not comprehensive because the government is doing all of this in secret. Although I do have to say, it's pretty interesting to see some of the things that they're targeting, and I'll talk about that in a minute. The Homeland Security Privacy Office actually itself said, yeah, there are a lot of problems with these fusion centers. The things they said are problematical: ambiguous lines of authority and lack of oversight, the participation of the military and the private sector, the problem of data mining, excessive secrecy, problems of incomplete information and inaccurate information, and mission creep, because these are no longer used to target, they're not just looking for terrorists, now they're looking for any bad guy. And in fact, they're not trying to say someone who has committed a crime, they're trying to predict who might commit a crime in the future. But despite these findings, that there are all these problems, Homeland Security has basically said that we leave it up to the states who are interested in preserving and protecting the rights of their citizens to do so. And we have no opinion as to what method the states should deploy to do it. So what that means is it's up to us. It's really up to us as citizens and residents and non-citizens and activists to enact legislative remedies at the state level and to build a system of checks and balances here in Massachusetts and in other states against these tactics. And I will tell you, we are hoping to pass legislation in the coming session. If we do, we will be the first and model state in the country to pass this kind of oversight legislation. So as we do in so many things, whether it's equal marriage rights or abolition, Massachusetts should be the first in the nation to do this and to lead the way for our colleagues in other ACLU affiliates in other states around the country. We've spearheaded this effort here at the ACLU of Massachusetts in a project we're calling Sunlight on Surveillance. So the first thing we did was we got to know what's going on. So back about 2 years ago, we started filing massive amounts of public information requests, FOIAs, Freedom of Information Act, and public information requests, just to find out what's going on. And through that, we were able to uncover a lot of the information that I'm talking about today, and that it's in some of the flyers and the materials that are here. You can look at that. We've actually posted it publicly, because there's no point in saying we want it to be public and then the ACLU squirrels it away, right? So we put it on something called spyfiles.org, and you can go look at that. We've also put it together. We have a backgrounder where we actually synthesized it, because it's a lot of information to go through, in a backgrounder called When We Are All Suspects, and I've got the last 5 copies of it here, but you can get it on our website at aclum.org and look up for When We Are All Suspects. And you can read that, and it's a pretty chilling report about what's going on here in Massachusetts. And then, as I said earlier, we've collected some examples of how the government is engaging in surveillance of ordinary Americans and their protected political speech. Let me share a few, because they're kind of interesting. In May of 2008, there was a report prepared by the Department of Homeland Security entitled the Universal Adversary Dynamic Threat Assessment. And it warned about the following organizations: the Sierra Club, the Humane Society, and the Audubon Society. Although known as mainstream organizations, they have possible links to eco-terrorists. Yeah, I'm worried. In California, they were targeting animal rights rallies, environmental demonstrations, anti-war protests, labor union organizing, and demonstrations against military recruiting. In Maryland, the state police was using undercover officers to infiltrate and spy on peace activists and death penalty groups, Amnesty International, and the Chesapeake Climate Action Network, according to documents that we obtained through a Freedom of Information Act request. In Virginia, they decided to target black colleges and universities, since clearly they're radical nodes for terrorists, they say. In Texas, they found that the Fusion Center was flagging former Congresswoman Cynthia McKinney, former U.S. Attorney General Ramsey Clark for surveillance, as well as the Council on American Islamic Relations, ANSWER, and the International Action Center. In Missouri, the modern militia movement was being tracked, and they said you have to be worried because anybody who supports presidential candidates like Ron Paul, Chuck Baldwin, Bob Barr are dangerous, and you must look for bumper stickers that would support things like Constitution campaigns, the Campaign for Liberty, or the Libertarian Party, or possibly Don't Spy on Me. In New York, they went after the War Resisters League, and that was funny because they said they were warned that this group was advocating Gandhian nonviolence. This is silly stuff, right? I mean, except that it's so serious. Just 2 weeks ago, we found out in Pennsylvania, they were targeting environmental groups opposed to local gas drilling, anti-war groups, animal rights activists, a gay and lesbian festival, a black power group, and Muslims observing Ramadan. It's crazy. And my personal favorite was in Georgia. They decided they would target vegetarians who were protesting outside of the honey-baked ham store. So what about Massachusetts? We do know that Mitt Romney was promoting that the Fusion Center spy on all mosques to see who was coming and going from religious worship, which is kind of silly because when you think about it, the guys who launched the 9/11 attack had, shaved off their beards and stayed away from mosques. I mean, the people you need to worry about, the ones who pretend they're not associated with their religion. And in addition, the state auditor, Joseph DeNucci, found the police from communities across the state were using the criminal record system to monitor Matt Damon, James Taylor, and Tom Brady, just for fun. So I'm not too worried about them. I don't think they are terrorists. Now, despite all of this domestic spying activity, it's really important to remember that this kind of data profiling hasn't made us any safer. Just the two most recent examples that we can talk about. In Times Square, the attempted Times Square bomber, he wasn't stopped by any intelligence collection or predictive policing. He was stopped because a couple of local passersby noticed the guy was acting weird, and fortunately they hadn't fired the local police guy on a horse, and he went and told him, and they caught him. And then it was gumshoe detective work, traditional policing work, community-based policing. They got the bad guy in that case, or alleged bad guy. Same thing with the underwear bomber on Northwest Airlines, the Christmas Day bomber. Same thing, it was like alert passengers and the stewardess, who nailed that guy. The intelligence, there was so much data on this guy that they missed. And the problem is, with this massive amount of data collection, they're making the haystack of intelligence bigger and bigger and bigger, making the needle harder and harder to find. So not only does this, what I think of as security theater or pretend security, not keep us safe, arguably it keeps us even less safe because it diverts so many resources away from local effective community policing and into this kind of data analysis stuff that we miss the real bad guys and we miss the kind of protection we really need to keep our communities safe. I wasn't going to talk about this, but there was this great example. We've been looking at how Homeland Security money is being spent in our towns around Massachusetts, and it's hard to track it. We're actually having to pass a law to get tracking so we can track it. And my favorite was the town that had decided to save money by turning off the street lights, but then got Homeland Security money to buy night vision goggles. And I'm sitting there thinking, as a woman who walks through the parking lot at night and a little nervous, I want the street light. I don't want a cop with night vision goggles watching. It's just crazy, and it's silly, but it's really serious because we have limited resources in our economy right now. We have limited tax base. We need to spend it wisely. And the ACLU isn't against law enforcement, and we're certainly not in favor of terrorists. But we think the effective way to keep us safe isn't to spy on everybody about everything, but rather to go back to the traditional probable cause, individualized suspicion, that has actually kept our country safe for a long time. So what about this notion that I have nothing to hide, right? So what's the problem? Go ahead, spy on me, right? I don't do anything wrong. That's the one I hear the most. Well, you know, Professor Commager wrote in his book, which I know you all have read because you must, Freedom, Loyalty, and Dissent, that the greatest danger that we face is not any particular kind of thought. The greatest danger we face is the absence of thought. And you know, this creation of vast digital dossiers on every person fosters a civil liberties climate in which we never know when our speech is being monitored. And we must act and think and speak at all times as if the government may be listening to us. And the result is that we have a chilling effect on our political speech. But even beyond that, it's this wholesale attack on our personal autonomy. A total surveillance society really undermines that most fundamental liberty interest, the freedom to express ourselves privately and to know who's listening. Freedom of expression means nothing if we lack the fundamental realm of privacy in which we can think and dream and test even new, even radical ideas, especially in places like the Academy and here at Greenfield Community College, where you should be able to say something and then say, you know, that was stupid after I said it. And try out new ideas without thinking you're going to be fed into a database. We have to know the government isn't tracking our reading habits or our phone calls or our movement as they have been doing with GPS trackers until the ACLU challenged it. The First Amendment really means nothing if we lose that zone of personal freedom where we can worship the gods of our choosing or not, where we can decide who we will love, and where we can explore privately or in our writings or in our conversations or in our art revolutionary ideals upon which our country was founded. Professor Dan Solove, who's at George Washington Law School, talks about this, and he says, you know, we're wrong when we talk about it as Orwell. The right literary reference is really Kafka and The Trial. And he writes, the danger is not simply Orwellian Big Brother or even Orwellian Little Brother who's watching us, but rather the use of secret databases and secret courts comprised of faceless bureaucrats who have the ability secretly to scrutinize and undermine our lives without our knowledge and with no ability to fight back. And it's not just a literary metaphor. It becomes a question of saying, did I not get tenure because of something I said? Did I not get that house? Or was I not able to rent that apartment because of something I emailed? Or some rally I went to? Am I not able to get medical coverage or insurance coverage because somebody looked at my medical files and I don't know about it? Did I not get that job because I went to the environmental rally? And you won't know because it's all done in secret. Consider the case of Professor Walter Murphy. He's one of our nation's constitutional scholars, a professor emeritus at Princeton. I bet probably knew Professor Commager, a decorated former Marine. Well, he was denied a boarding pass when he went to Newark because he was on a terrorist watch list. And he asked the airline employee, why am I there? And the airline employee said, well, have you been to a peace march? We are banning a lot of people because they've been to peace marches. I explained, said Murphy, that I had not so marched, but I had, in September of 2006, given a lecture at Princeton that was televised and put on the web that was highly critical of George Bush for his violations of the Constitution. Yep, that would do it, said the airport employee. As Professor Commager warned us, the greatest danger we face is not of a particular kind of thought, but rather the absence of thought. And in a total surveillance society, we are encouraged not to have any thought. So what can we do about it? Because obviously, privacy can't protect itself. Well, as Americans, and especially, quite frankly, as residents of this Commonwealth, we are uniquely empowered with our federal Constitution, and frankly, the best state constitution in the country, the world's oldest written constitution, John Adams' Constitution. We can take action to dismantle at the state level this surveillance industrial complex and to try to restore our system of checks and balances before it's too late. In the coming years, we need your help to do this on three fronts: on the federal, the state, and the local level. So I'm going to talk about each of those and then we'll take your questions. First, at the federal level, among the many things the ACLU is working on, we're trying to pass reform of the Federal Electronic Communications Privacy Act. This act was the federal law that was supposed to protect digital privacy It was last updated in 1986. Remember VHS? So a lot of things have changed, certainly in technology, since 1986. So why hasn't the digital privacy law changed? We need to keep pace with the modern world and update this law. Among other things, the proposed legislation would protect personal information, like your email, your online documents, and your personal records without a search warrant. So just like the government can't enter your home and take your personal papers without a warrant, they shouldn't be able to enter your computer and take your personal papers without your warrant. It would safeguard local information, so they can't track you with your cell phone, again, without a warrant. So if they need to do legitimate law enforcement, this wouldn't stop them from doing that. This would only stop them from tracking you for illegal or unconstitutional purposes. And it says that the government can't use illegally obtained information. It would be excluded in a criminal procedure, criminal trial. And finally, it would require transparency with notice and regular reporting, so people actually know when and why companies turn over information to the government. You know, as many of you probably know, in Europe, you actually own the data about yourself. Here, you know, the library owns your library reading records, the video store owns your video records, your medical doctor owns your medical records, your bank owns your bank records. So the government and the ISP, your internet service provider, owns your ISP records. So the government goes directly to them and you never know. But that doesn't happen in Europe. In Europe, they have to give you notice. Why shouldn't we have the same protections as our neighbors do over in Europe to be able to control the information about ourselves? And that really is the definition of privacy, the ability to control information about yourself. At the state level, we have two big initiatives that we're trying, one addressing surveillance and the other addressing secrecy. And we really need your support. You have great representation here, and you need to make sure that your state reps are going to be on board with this legislation, helping as lead sponsors on this, and we'll be, if you sign up, we'll call upon you to ask them to do that. The one is going to be a Data Profiling Prevention Act, which will provide state-based oversight of these fusion centers and other spying centers in the Commonwealth by first prohibiting law enforcement collection of information about political and religious views, associations, and activities, unless it directly relates to a criminal investigation. It would establish data integrity and safeguards so that if garbage comes in, it can't be disseminated without some kind of equality analysis, and only disseminated on a need-to-know basis. And it would create transparency and oversight by requiring routine audits and public release of audits about what information is being collected and when it's been abused and things like that. The second, so we have the Data Privacy Protection, Data Profiling Prevention Act, and the second is a reform of the Massachusetts Public Records Law. Now, you'd think it's bad that the federal law hasn't been updated since 1986 on electronic records. Well, the Public Records Law in Massachusetts has not been updated since 1973. And as a result, it doesn't cover any electronic communications. So when we say, for example, to the police, we'd like to see all of your data on profiling stops or traffic stops for racial profiling purposes, they say, sure, $300,000. I don't run a bridge organization, so we don't have that kind of dough, but they can charge $1 a page. They could, for free, turn it over to us electronically, as they do, frankly, in other places like New York State. So we need to update it. It also, frankly, it's a drag for town clerks who have to sit at the photocopy machine and make photocopies of everything. They should just be able to email it over. It's a public record. It should be available to all of us as members of the public, and it should be done for free. And so we're hoping to update the Public Records Law from 1973. People are suggesting we do things like have a party like it's 1973, which is great when you're young. I'm going, it wasn't that long ago. So anyway, but we want to update the Public Records Law. The things that will be included, it would ensure that records are kept in electronic form or accessible and usable in electronic form to the public. It would increase public information by reducing fees and allowing courts to award attorneys' fees when record holders refuse to produce the documents. Right now, if they just say no, we go, we'll sue you. And they go, ha. You know, we want to have a little enforcement power there. And finally, it would also enable you to go in and see if the record about you is wrong and to update it. I have to tell you, I always feel bad. There's a really famous and wonderful law professor at Yale named Carol Rose. I always feel like, gosh, she's probably on like all the watch lists and in the fusion centers because they think she's me. She needs to have a chance to clear her good name and mine. And then finally, locally. What we really need all of you to do is to to pay attention and to question local authority. When you hear about government surveillance, like on Route 91, like surveillance cameras going into your schools or surveillance cameras going into your libraries, which they are all across the state. Homeland Security surveillance cameras just got put into my kids' elementary school. They must know they're my kids. There she comes, picking them up again. And what you need to do is you can contact the ACLU and we'll help you ask these questions. So you don't have to do it on your own, but we are there to help you. But we're not going to always know about it, and you will know about it. You'll hear about it. It was great. It was funny. I heard about it because somebody went to the school board meeting, not me, and came back and said, oh, they were all saying, what if the ACLU finds out? Thank you. So the questions that we would ask, we don't say they're all bad, okay? I mean, sometimes surveillance cameras are good if you want to, be at your ATM machine or whatever. It's not like we're anti-all technology. We're not Luddites. But why are they collecting the information? Who has access to it? How is it being stored? What protections are there to prevent abuse? Those are the kinds of questions that we need to have in a democracy to begin a debate about why are we using surveillance, how are we using surveillance, and what steps are we taking to make sure it's not abused. So really the long-term objective here is to really change and shape the public awareness and the attitudes about government surveillance and corporate data mining and privacy in general. We need to have a real engaged constituency of privacy advocates. I'm old enough to remember when the first Earth Day came along. And before that, nobody thought about the environment. But now there's a whole movement. It's mainstream everywhere except for at the fusion centers. Right? Who's not in favor of protecting the environment? Oh, don't answer that. Okay. Many of us are in favor of protecting the environment. It's certainly not really that radical anymore, but it was at the time. But we need to create the same kind of public constituency in favor of privacy protections. And I don't buy it when people say, oh, young people, privacy's dead and young people don't believe it. No. They want to be able to put the data up and control the information about themselves. That's what privacy is. It doesn't mean that everything's secret. It means that you have a say and control over the accuracy of the data and the information made public about yourself, that you can take it off if you don't want it up there anymore, and that you are the controller of your own information and the owner of your own information, and that it's not being used secretly to undermine your ability to operate as a free and functioning human being in our society. The ACLU as a membership organization, we work in the courts, we work in the Congress and the State House, and then we work in communities across the Commonwealth and around the nation. And I am dedicated to trying to make sure the ACLU is not a Boston-centric organization here in Massachusetts, but has a presence in every single city and town in our Commonwealth, because we're tiny. I mean, we have 3 lawyers? 4 lawyers now. And we don't have a big staff, okay? We need all of you to be the eyes and the ears, to help us to be part of building this movement, to talk to your friends and your neighbors, to ask questions, to question authority. So I do hope that you will sign up today. We do have powerful weapons to stop this. I'm very optimistic that we can, because we have the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. We have the ability to pass laws, especially here in Massachusetts now, and we can, in fact, use technology in support of freedom. We have now Facebook and Twitter and all this stuff, and I've hired a 25-year-old person to do it, and she's really good. Because I know I can't, but she can, and you can. And so we can use technology to support freedom rather than to undermine it. Commenter wrote that the Bill of Rights was not written to protect the government from trouble. It was written precisely to give the people the constitutional means to cause trouble for the government when they no longer trust it. So let's use that Bill of Rights, and let's use those other tools at our disposal to cause some trouble, because privacy won't defend itself. So I welcome your questions, and thank you very much. So thoughts, questions? Yeah.
Well, it's interesting that you're giving a talk about this subject at this time. I just watched a very informative film put out by National, the Public Broadcasting System,
yeah.
in conjunction with Masterpiece Theater, and it was called The Last Enemy.
Oh,
I don't know if any of you have seen
The Last
it,
Enemy?
It certainly goes into the Orwellian aspect of total surveillance, from swiping a card at an ATM to everything else, and it exposes many of the abuses that you spoke of today. I would like to urge everybody to see that film. It's available at the Greenfield Public Library.
The Last Enemy, National Public.
The Last Enemy, yes. It was
television?
put out by the British Masterpiece Theatre.
Masterpiece Theatre?
in conjunction
Sounds great.
with WGBI
I'll write it.
in Boston. And it pertains exactly to what you're talking about here in a very real and visual form. But I wanted to ask a question about listening devices. And, you know, we have seen this technology at work in many places in which somebody 100 yards away with a big ooh-jah that we see it done in football games and sporting events, and it's able to penetrate glass.
Right.
And concrete, you know, supposedly a foot thick. And who authorizes this?
Right.
How does it come about? I come from a very small town. Bill Newman has been there in the past. Our Homeland Security grants have been for surveillance cameras on police cruisers. And I'm noticing in Greenfield with the new traffic lights, for example, there are security cameras. How does the public
Right.
approach the subject and say, fine, we want new traffic lights, do they have to have the cameras?
Right,
Or,
well, that's
We don't
right.
mind this, you know, but it seems like it's going for suppressive devices like tasers. You know, surveillance cameras in every nook and cranny.
Right.
You know.
Night vision goggles
Yeah,
and
so
surveillance
how does
cameras.
the small community address this?
Well, there's a
Because
couple,
most
right.
of the grants are applied for by the police department. And
Sure.
you know, the public rarely even gets to see that because it goes through the select board and doesn't even, in a sense, come to town meeting unless a motion is made to have the acceptance of all grants come before public meeting.
Right,
Town
right,
meeting.
right. That's a really great point, is how do we begin to put sunlight on this kind of surveillance? And, you know, it's interesting, because, for example, on the traffic lights, the automatic ticketing at stoplights, that's increased the amount of traffic accidents, because people come to sudden stops. So, you know, there's a lot of great information out there about why that's a bad idea as a public policy matter. In terms of listening devices, who's paying for those? But we as citizens must ask those questions in the public forum. And if you want some help, you know, you can call the ACLU and we'll give you the list of questions that you should ask on stoplight cameras, the list of questions you should ask on the listening devices. Why not say we'd like to know how much money our town is getting from Homeland Security grants? And by the way, if you won't tell us, we'll be happy to file a public records request. I mean, I always say to people, gee, I'd love to do this cooperatively, but I hate to have to sue you, but I will. You know, you have a right to know that information. It's not a privilege, it's a right. They work for us. And so if you think that's going on in your town, you know, let us know, let Bill or call me, whoever, let the ACLU know. And we may not have the resources to show up at the town meeting, but we have the resources to give you and other people in your community the right to show up. And if they won't give it to you, then we will, unfortunately, take further action. And that's the way to do it. And that's why we need a widespread citizens movement to do this, because we're never going to have the resources to have staff people in all these places. So we need you to be aware of it, and then to tell your friends about it, and then to tell us about it. And we're happy to help you. It's great, yeah.
Just as a matter of record,
Yeah.
the traffic lights in Greenfield do not have surveillance cameras on them.
Great.
They look like cameras, but they're not. They're sensors that simply tell the light when to go on and off. When those were installed, we did a story about that because
Great.
we had seen them ourselves and went and investigated, and in fact, they are not cameras, they're just sensors. Okay?
And actually, that's a great point. Your local news media
The other
is
thing
your
I should
best
say is
friend
that
on
the
this.
reporter routinely reports on Homeland Security grants for the county. We cover the towns, and when they get those grants, either for the police or the fire departments, we run stories on what they're used for and so forth.
Wonderful.
Now, that's not to say there might be some that we don't know about, but the ones that come up through the town mechanisms, we routinely report on that. Just for the record.
That's great. And the media is a really important place here because, I mean, they like asking questions. That's their bread and butter. And so a lot of times, just calling up your local newspaper and saying, could you find out what's going on, is another way to do it. And so thank you. That's a really, really good point. Yeah.
What are those cameras on the overpasses on 91? Those look like telephone poles that
Yep.
have the little fisheye looking thing?
That they're putting in?
I
Yeah.
think those are cameras. I think
Those are
they're-
cameras.
I think they're traffic the idea is to monitor traffic on the highway. I believe we had a story about that as well.
Yeah, there was just a story, but I'd like to know, because in the story there's a line, vote to use to help monitor traffic and law enforcement. Well, what is that? They can tell the make and model of your car. Are they also going to tell the color of your skin? Are they going to start pulling people over if they look like they might be undocumented, for example? How is that going to be? And what are the protections? What are they collecting? For what reason? What's the database protection? And what's the auditing system? And how will that be publicly made available on a routine basis? Those are the kinds of questions that we can ask, that citizens can ask, that we can get our local newspapers and television stations to ask, and we should. So it's, again, sunlight on surveillance. It is a great disinfectant. Yeah, right here.
I was wondering, regarding your legislative initiatives on database privacy protection that corporations might amass, what kind of reaction do you typically get from corporations on your efforts?
Right.
And how is the recent Supreme Court decision on campaign financing going to affect, you think, your success?
That's a great question. First of all, what's really interesting is that, talk about strange bedfellows. There is the Digital Due Process Coalition, which includes the ACLU and, Electronic Privacy Information Center, and then Microsoft, Google, AOL, Facebook. I'm like, oh my God, what are we doing? And so I actually said, wow, there's this, and we're all pushing for it, because what happens is the corporations want clear rules. Right now what happens is they get strong-armed by the FBI or whoever else at the feds to turn the data over, and they feel kind of creepy about it, but they kind of don't know how to say no, and you end up with this weird situation. They would like it if there was a warrant requirement. Because then they could say, when the feds come along and ask for it, they can say, oops, sorry, the law says you need a warrant. It's a really clear, bright line. Corporations like clear, bright lines, in order to function. In terms of, I don't think that the Citizens United case is going to affect that, because I don't think that Citizens United, I hope it doesn't, says that corporations have a right to spy on people. It's a very troubling decision on a whole range of things, and I'm happy to talk to you about it, but I don't think in terms of the surveillance stuff that it's going to, I'm having a hard time seeing how it could be used to justify doing illegal surveillance any more than I could do illegal surveillance or you could do illegal surveillance, but it's a good point. Yeah, the gentleman in the back.
Could you speak a little bit about the issue relating to whether the right of privacy is in the Constitution or not?
Right. Well, the word privacy doesn't show up in the Constitution as such, but it's been read in a couple places. Obviously, the Fourth Amendment, to be free from unwarranted and unreasonable searches of your personal effects in your home and things like that. And it's also in a liberty interest, in the right to liberty, which was read in the Lawrence case by the Supreme Court, which was the right to engage in sex in the privacy of your own home with whomever you choose to, as a liberty interest. And so I think there's a couple of different places, at least, and Bill, there may be more, but I'm thinking Fourth Amendment and the liberty interests are really the places that it's read into. But you're right, we have to also pass laws that expressly protect privacy. So the Constitution alone gives us the framework, but then we need the statutes at both the federal and the state level to make it an enforceable law more effectively.
You would go back to those two places?
Yeah, and I would actually, in a lot of this stuff, also go to the First Amendment, which is your freedom of association rights. So you'd have First Amendment freedom of association rights, Fourth Amendment unreasonable search and seizure, and then liberty interest, which is the right to have the privacy interest, certainly in the privacy of your home. It's been read into. Yeah.
Well, you mentioned during your speech that digital profiling is kind of like the result of all the surveillance, like they amass your information and then decide like if you could be a threat. And then as an alternative, you mentioned a couple instances where alert citizens noticing suspicious activity were the ones who actually found the criminals. But is that any fairer of an assessment of suspicion, considering that you're still just like, drawing upon conclusions about a person? Like, is there some happy medium where you have like this sort of digital profiling plus other?
Yeah, and I think the difference is in the cases I was talking about, you had somebody in the process of carrying out a crime. Right. So that's a pretty reasonable basis of suspicion.
Then you could just say that you could like, if you're sort of like an eccentric person and happen to carry like water guns in your coat, that you're going to be arrested every other day. Is that fair?
Well, I'm not sure that carrying water guns would be a basis of reasonable suspicion. If you look like you were carrying a gun and about to shoot somebody, sure, that's a reasonable basis. I mean, police can do that now. What we're talking about is to say, gee, here's a person who has tattoos and goes to environmental rallies and is a member of the Anti-Death Penalty Coalition. We're going to follow them around. Let's put a GPS on their car. That's the kind of stuff I'm talking about, where you go to their protected political activities or protected political speech and decide, perhaps because I'm a local police officer who doesn't agree with those things, that I'm the person who's going to make that decision and decide to track that person. They've committed no crime. They're not in the act of committing a crime. There's no imminent commission of a crime about to take place. And that's the difference. And you make a good point. It's not always an easy, bright line. But where we're drawing the line right now is there's no line at all. None at all. Yeah, right here.
Whenever I talk about this particular subject, friends and family, I get a lot of, oh, well, what you don't know isn't going to hurt you. Ignorance is bliss type thing. If you don't know about it, don't worry about it, you know, whatever. What would you say to somebody like that?
Well, I would say, but you know, what happens when you suddenly don't get that health insurance? Is it a case of genetic profiling, right? Somebody has information about your blood type or something. What happens when you don't get that mortgage or that loan? Or suddenly you lose your job and the other person didn't lose their job and you don't know why. It's the stuff that you don't know, and then you start wondering, wow, maybe it's because I went to the environmental rally. And then I'll say, I won't go to another one. And all of a sudden our democracy starts to wither because people start to become so self-censoring that they say, I'm not going to do anything that might be used against me, even if it's perfectly legal and in fact good. I'm not going to do it because I don't want to get in trouble. And that's the problem. It's not the dangerous thoughts, what Professor Commager talked about. It's not the dangerous thoughts that we're afraid of. It's the absence of thought. And then our whole democracy starts to wither because people don't participate anymore. Yeah, in the back there.
Carol, this is really great. Thanks for being here. I have a question about the Freedom of Information Act. In the past administration, I was informed, since Homeland Security has now been introduced into our federal government, it would not be a good idea for me to petition for my records under the Freedom of Information Act because of my activism for as long as 18 with the Frank Rizzo mayor recall petition, which came up as subversive activities against the United States government.
Right.
You know, red flag. I don't fly, by the way. I try everywhere. But when is it safe for me to, because I'd love to see my records. You know, I have a family member who's in the government and said, don't ask for, is it safe enough to ask for?
You know, I can't tell you that it's safe, and I'll tell you what's even more interesting in this, you know, digital age. I mean, it used to be that there was this, you know, the shoebox with your records, right, or whatever they had. You know, now it's all digital. So they may say to you, yeah, we didn't find anything, and then the minute you leave, they put it all together with the click of a few buttons, right?
See, that's why I'm not on computers.
Right.
That's why I do cash.
Right.
I mean, seriously, it's.
But in a democracy, should you or anyone else have to live like that?
Right.
I mean, that's the real question, is what becomes of the quality of our democracy when we start to say, I'm not going to fly because I don't want to get groped or scoped. You know, I'm not going to do these things. That's not right. It may be the smart thing for you to do as an individual, but as a society, that's not the kind of society that I want to live in and that I want to be a part of. I want to be able to use all the conveniences of technology. I want to have a fast lane pass, but I don't want to have the fast lane pass used to track my movements by the government unless I'm under criminal suspicion.
And there is somebody in this lecture hall that is monitoring this lecture. I mean, that's the reality. The reality is that Carol Rose, you are the executive director of the American Civil Liberties Union of Massachusetts. So somebody here is monitoring you, and that's a reality.
And I think there's a little bit of safety in numbers.
Yes.
I mean that. I mean, you know, you can say things as part of the ACLU and do things that maybe you wouldn't be able to otherwise. Okay, I've just been told this is our last question, and you've been very patient.
The neighborhood informants, are they deputized or how? Who are they?
Well, it's a combination. I mean, there are there is some of that, and then there's a lot of people who are coerced into being informants, and we're finding this particularly among the undocumented population. People get called in to the FBI, and they say, you're not a target, you're just a witness, and then they go, but here's everybody in your neighborhood. Would you spy on them? And you say, no, and they go, oh, well, now you're a target. So one of the things you should know is if you are contacted by the FBI to come in, really get a lawyer. Get an ACLU lawyer or another lawyer. You should always go with a lawyer. And one of the things that we had found, I was so excited about this, we trained a bunch of volunteer lawyers to go and represent people in FBI when the FBI called. And then what happened is every time the lawyer would then call the FBI and go, well, my client so-and-so was contacted by you to talk to you, and I'm their lawyer. They'd go, never mind. So my poor lawyers would never get to go. But you know what? Obviously, they weren't people who are under criminal suspicion, because if they were, they would have talked to them. And so the main thing to do is to understand that we're here as a resource for you, but we need you to be a resource for the ACLU as well, which is to pay attention to what's going on, to let your friends and family know what's going on, and to let us know what's going on if you think there's something untoward, and we'll help you, if nothing else, to ask questions and to put the sunlight on the Surveillance Society. So thank you all very, very much for being here.